prices for vehicles have been going up the last couple of years. But yes, I mean, almost all of our steel and aluminum we buy at Ford Motor Company for the U.S. is here in the U.S.
Ford's CEO is furious, and for good reason. Automakers rely on global trade to keep costs down and production efficient. Now, a sudden policy shift threatens to upend everything. Factories could shut down, jobs could be lost, and car prices could skyrocket. This is not just another political move. This is an economic earthquake that could send shockwaves across the entire industry. So what does this mean for you? How will this impact your next car purchase? And is Ford prepared to fight back or destined to struggle? Let's break it all down. How the industry changed forever, overnight. The announcement came without warning, sending shockwaves through the automotive world. The decision to impose tariffs on imported vehicles and components caught manufacturers, suppliers, and consumers completely off guard. Stocks of major automakers, including Ford, plummeted as uncertainty gripped the market. Financial analysts scrambled to assess the implications, while chief executive officers of leading car companies issued emergency statements in a desperate attempt to reassure investors. Ford, a company deeply rooted in the fabric of American industry, was one of the hardest hit. The tariff, set at a staggering percentage on all imported automotive parts, meant that production costs would skyrocket overnight. The supply chain, which had been meticulously optimized over decades, was suddenly thrown into chaos. Dealerships braced for impact, knowing that rising costs would inevitably lead to higher prices for consumers. Meanwhile, the general public, many of whom were planning to purchase a new vehicle, now faced the grim reality that their choices would soon become significantly more expensive. But here's where it gets worse. The real impact is not just on automakers, it is coming straight for the consumer. As costs ripple through the economy, everything from financing options to repair expenses will escalate. The question is no longer whether the industry will suffer, but rather how deep the damage will go. Ford's internal emergency. Behind closed doors, Ford's executives are scrambling. The atmosphere inside Ford's headquarters was frantic. Jim Farley, the chief executive officer, convened an emergency meeting with top executives and financial strategists to assess the situation. Every department, from supply chain management to government relations, was put on high alert. The first step was damage control. Communications teams crafted statements to reassure shareholders and the public, but internally, the mood was anything but calm. Ford had spent years cultivating global supply chains to keep costs down while maintaining efficiency. Now, those very supply chains had become a liability. Executives scrambled to find potential workarounds. Could they renegotiate contracts with suppliers? Was there a way to shift production domestically without incurring unsustainable costs? Lobbying efforts were intensified as Ford's government relations team sought immediate discussions with policymakers. Jim Farley personally reached out to lawmakers, emphasizing the catastrophic consequences that such tariffs would have not only on Ford but on the broader economy. Meanwhile, employees at Ford plants across the country grew anxious. Rumors of potential layoffs began circulating, adding to the growing uncertainty. The company's history had been marked by resilience through economic downturns, but this was different. This was a policy-driven crisis that Ford had little control over. Ford's nightmare does not end here, because their biggest rivals are already plotting their next move. As Ford fights to stabilize its operations, competitors are looking for ways to capitalize on the situation. The crippling blow to car production. Ford cannot build cars without parts, but what happens when those parts get significantly more expensive? Automakers rely on an intricate network of global suppliers to manufacture vehicles efficiently. Tariffs do not just affect finished cars, they disrupt the entire ecosystem of parts, components, and raw materials that flow between countries. For Ford, this meant an immediate spike in the cost of essential materials such as steel, aluminum, and microchips. Factories that once operated on razor-thin margins suddenly faced ballooning production costs. Suppliers, particularly those based in Mexico and Canada, were now dealing with a dilemma: absorb the tariffs and risk financial ruin, or pass the costs onto Ford, which would then be forced to pass them onto consumers. Ford plants in Michigan, Ohio, and Kentucky, already running at full capacity, could not simply shift production overnight. The logistical challenge of moving supply chains and adjusting assembly lines was monumental. More than that, it was costly. The company faced the grim reality that certain vehicle models might no longer be financially viable under these conditions. To make matters worse, suppliers began warning Ford that shipments could slow down due to the economic strain caused by the new trade policies. Manufacturing delays loomed, threatening to leave dealerships without inventory. If production slowed, so too would sales, creating a downward spiral that could take years to recover from. But Ford is not the only one suffering. There is an entire industry on the brink of disaster. Every major automaker is now scrambling to adjust, and the ripple effects will be felt in ways that extend far beyond just car prices. A warning from history. The last time this happened, entire industries collapsed. This is not the first time tariffs have sent shockwaves through the economy. History is littered with examples of trade wars that led to economic downturns, job losses, and industry-wide collapses. One of the most infamous examples is the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, implemented nearly 100 years ago. Designed to protect American industries, it instead led to retaliatory tariffs from other countries, exacerbating the Great Depression. The automotive industry, which had been thriving in the early 20th century, saw demand plummet as car prices soared. Factories shut down, workers were laid off, and the economic damage was irreversible. More recently, in the early 21st century, steel tariffs imposed by the government had unintended consequences. While they were intended to support domestic steel production, they instead led to higher costs for manufacturers, including automakers. Companies like Ford were forced to pay significantly more for raw materials, making American-made cars less competitive on the global market. And yet, here we are again. Policymakers seem to be repeating the mistakes of the past, believing that tariffs will strengthen domestic industries when, in reality, they often do the opposite. The question now is not whether history will repeat itself, it is how severe the consequences will be this time. So why is this mistake being repeated? The answer lies in politics. This is not just about trade, it is about election cycles, public perception, and economic narratives that shape the decisions made at the highest levels of government. What happens next will determine the future of the American auto industry. The stakes have never been higher. Ford's rival automakers react. One company's nightmare is another's golden opportunity. The thing is, while Ford scrambles to adjust to the disruptive impact of new tariffs, its direct competitors are wasting no time in repositioning themselves. General Motors and Stellantis, two of the largest American automotive manufacturers, are carefully crafting their responses to mitigate the financial blow. These companies, while facing similar challenges, have distinct strategies that could determine their fate in an increasingly volatile market. General Motors, long known for its global presence, is rapidly reevaluating its supply chain dependencies. By leveraging its manufacturing facilities outside the affected trade zones, the company aims to minimize the cost impact of tariffs. Its operations in South Korea and China, for instance, provide an alternative pipeline for vehicle production and parts procurement. Although this does not make General Motors immune to tariffs, it gives the company an edge over Ford, which is deeply reliant on production facilities in Canada and Mexico. Stellantis, the multinational parent company of Chrysler, Dodge, and Jeep, is pursuing a more aggressive approach. The company is in discussions with several U.S. state governments about expanding domestic production, securing financial incentives to offset rising costs. Stellantis believes that by positioning itself as the most American automaker, it can win consumer favor in the face of increased scrutiny on foreign manufacturing. However, this strategy is risky, as shifting supply chains requires significant investment and time. Even as these companies implement protective measures, they are preparing for a broader economic storm. Tariffs are just the beginning, and they know that the real crisis has yet to unfold. But these automakers are also preparing for their own crisis, and here is why. Global retaliation, the trade war escalates. It's no longer just about the United States. The whole world is responding. The ripple effect of these tariffs extends far beyond American borders. As the United States enforces harsh trade policies, other nations are retaliating with their own economic countermeasures. Canada and Mexico, both heavily dependent on automotive trade with the United States, are now imposing tariffs on American-made vehicles and components. The result is a dangerous cycle of escalating costs that threatens to undermine the industry on a global scale. Canada, historically one of the largest suppliers of auto parts to the United States, has announced steep retaliatory tariffs on American-made vehicles. This move directly impacts manufacturers that rely on Canadian supply chains, including Ford and General Motors. If left unresolved, this trade dispute could significantly slow cross-border production, leading to factory closures and layoffs. Mexico is taking an equally firm stance, with a significant share of American automakers' manufacturing operations located within its borders. orders, Mexico is pushing back by raising tariffs on critical vehicle components. This action increases production costs for cars assembled in Mexico but sold in the United States, further tightening an already constrained market. Meanwhile, China, a dominant player in global auto manufacturing, is using this moment to its advantage. While it has imposed its own set of retaliatory tariffs on American vehicles, China is also aggressively expanding its exports to other regions, seeking to replace American brands in emerging markets. This strategic shift is already causing concern among US automakers, who fear losing their foothold in key international markets. These international reactions highlight the far-reaching consequences of the trade war. The automotive industry is no longer just battling domestic tariffs, it is fighting a full-scale global economic shift. And if you think car prices are bad now, just wait until you see what's coming. What this means for consumers? Well, you can forget buying a new car. Your used car just became a gold mine. With automakers struggling to adapt to the new trade landscape, the effects are being felt directly by consumers. The price of new vehicles is climbing at an alarming rate, making them increasingly inaccessible to the average buyer. As manufacturers absorb higher costs from tariffs and supply chain disruptions, these expenses are inevitably passed down to consumers in the form of steep price hikes. The used car market is also experiencing dramatic changes. With new cars becoming more expensive, demand for used vehicles is skyrocketing. As a result, the price of pre-owned cars has surged, making them a hot commodity. Consumers who purchased vehicles just a few years ago are now seeing their cars appreciate in value, a rare phenomenon in the automotive world. This shift has led to a highly competitive used car market, where buyers are scrambling to secure deals before prices rise even further. Repair and maintenance costs are also increasing. With tariffs on auto parts driving up prices, mechanics and dealerships are raising service fees. Even routine maintenance, such as tire replacements and brake repairs, is becoming more costly. The financial burden on car owners is growing, forcing many to reconsider their vehicle ownership plans. For consumers who rely on financing, the situation is even more precarious. Higher vehicle prices mean larger loans, steeper interest rates, and longer payment terms. The financial strain of purchasing a car is becoming more significant, pushing some buyers out of the market entirely. But there's another industry that's about to take a massive hit, and no one is talking about it. The political calculations behind the tariffs. Is this really about protecting American jobs, or something else? While the stated goal of these tariffs is to protect American manufacturing and jobs, the reality is far more complex. Behind the economic rhetoric lies a deeply political strategy, one designed to appeal to nationalist sentiments and win support ahead of upcoming elections. The tariffs serve as a powerful political tool, reinforcing the image of a government that is putting America first. By imposing harsh penalties on foreign imports, policymakers are attempting to shift public perception, portraying these measures as a necessary defense against unfair trade practices. However, the economic consequences tell a different story. Rather than strengthening American manufacturing, these tariffs are driving up costs for domestic automakers and disrupting global trade relationships. The short-term political gains may come at the expense of long-term economic stability. Experts warn that these policies could backfire, leading to lower production output, job losses, and even a potential recession within the industry. Public sentiment is divided. While some support the tariffs as a way to rebuild domestic manufacturing, others see them as an unnecessary burden that will ultimately harm American workers and consumers. The debate is intensifying, and the outcome of these policies remains uncertain. But the long-term consequences, that's an entirely different game. How foreign automakers are getting ahead. There's a quiet winner in this trade war, and it is not Ford. While American automakers scramble to manage the impact of rising tariffs, foreign manufacturers are seizing the moment to expand their influence. Toyota, Hyundai, and Volkswagen are among the brands capitalizing on this shift, positioning themselves as more competitive alternatives to Ford and General Motors. Toyota, a company known for its adaptability, has already begun leveraging its production plants in the United States to avoid the brunt of tariff-related price increases. With strategic investments in manufacturing facilities in southern states, Toyota continues to strengthen its foothold in the American market, ensuring it remains cost-competitive despite shifting trade policies. Hyundai, a brand that has steadily gained traction in the American automotive landscape, is accelerating its efforts to dominate the market. By expanding its electric vehicle lineup and focusing on fuel-efficient models, Hyundai is drawing in cost-conscious consumers who may otherwise have considered a domestic brand. The company has also secured supply chain agreements that allow it to source parts outside the heavily impacted regions, ensuring steady production even as costs soar elsewhere. Volkswagen, a European giant with a long-standing presence in the United States, is using its global network to mitigate disruptions. The company has diversified its production strategies, ensuring that its American market supply remains stable. By shifting more resources to its American plants and leveraging its global supply chain, Volkswagen is uniquely positioned to weather the storm caused by tariffs. These foreign brands are not just surviving, they are thriving. However, their success comes with new challenges. The industry is on the verge of another transformation, and even the winners of this trade war may struggle to maintain their lead. But even these brands have a bigger problem coming their way. Electric vehicles are changing the game. The electric vehicle market's unexpected twist. Could this tariff war actually help electric vehicles? While traditional automakers brace for financial turmoil, electric vehicle manufacturers like Tesla and Rivian are poised to take advantage of the chaos. With fewer dependencies on foreign-made components and a focus on domestic production, these companies may emerge as unexpected beneficiaries of the ongoing trade disputes. Tesla, which already produces many of its vehicles in the United States, is largely insulated from the worst effects of the tariffs. While its reliance on certain materials may create pricing pressures, its streamlined supply chain and direct-to-consumer sales model give it an edge. By bypassing traditional dealership networks and keeping costs lower than its competitors, Tesla can maintain a strong position in the market. Rivian, a newer player in the electric vehicle market, is similarly positioned to capitalize on this shift. With significant investments in American manufacturing, the company is in a prime position to attract consumers who are now facing higher prices for traditional gasoline-powered vehicles. Rivian has also secured government incentives that help offset production costs, ensuring its electric trucks and sport utility vehicles remain an appealing option for buyers looking for alternatives to legacy automakers. However, even these electric vehicle manufacturers face a significant hurdle. The availability of materials essential to battery production remains a critical concern, but there is one more factor that could decide everything: where automakers get their materials. The supply chain reinvention. It is time to move fast or die. Ford has no choice but to change everything. With supply chain disruptions continuing to plague the industry, automakers are scrambling to rethink how and where they source their materials. The reliance on global suppliers has become a liability, forcing companies to accelerate plans for more localized production. Ford, recognizing the urgency of the situation, is exploring domestic supply chains and making substantial investments in reshaping its logistics network. This includes increasing reliance on North American parts manufacturers and investing in new production facilities within the United States. The goal is to reduce exposure to foreign trade policies while maintaining production efficiency. General Motors is also pivoting toward a more resilient supply chain, negotiating contracts with alternative suppliers and securing domestic sources for critical vehicle components. The company is actively working on strategies to insulate itself from international supply chain fluctuations, which could provide long-term benefits beyond the current crisis. Foreign automakers, despite having advantages in certain areas, are also reconfiguring their logistics strategies. Toyota and Hyundai are both expanding their North American manufacturing operations to minimize dependency on overseas suppliers. The shift toward localized production not only addresses tariff-related concerns, but also enhances supply chain stability, reducing the risk of future disruptions. While these strategies may offer a temporary reprieve, there is a larger issue looming over the industry. The rising cost of raw materials, particularly steel and aluminum, threaten to overshadow these supply chain innovations. But no amount of strategy will matter if raw materials keep getting more expensive. Let me explain. The hidden crisis. As the effects of tariffs ripple through the automotive industry, the cost of essential materials continues to rise. Steel and aluminum, two of the most crucial materials in vehicle production, are now subject to increased pricing pressures, creating widespread economic consequences. Ford, General Motors, and other domestic automakers are facing soaring material costs, forcing them to either absorb the financial hit or pass it on to consumers. This dilemma has resulted in higher vehicle prices, which further compounds affordability concerns for buyers already impacted by inflation and interest rate hikes. Beyond the automotive industry, the rising cost of steel and aluminum is creating challenges for construction, aviation, and infrastructure development. Industries that rely on these materials for large-scale projects are now grappling with cost overruns and potential delays. The economic ripple effect extends far beyond car production, affecting countless sectors of the economy. Consumers, in particular, will feel the burden as costs continue to escalate. Higher vehicle prices, increased expenses for home renovations, and even rising costs in consumer consumer electronics are all direct consequences of these material price surges. The impact of tariffs extends beyond the showroom floor, shaping financial realities in unexpected ways. And the worst part, these costs will hit the average American in unexpected ways. Will this destroy American car companies or make them stronger? The tariffs imposed on vehicle imports have placed the entire United States automotive industry in a precarious position. Automakers must now choose between two paths, either finding ways to innovate and absorb the financial impact, or facing an inevitable decline due to rising costs and lost competitiveness. For decades, manufacturers such as Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis have relied on global supply chains to keep production costs manageable. However, with these new economic barriers, the cost of doing business has surged, creating pressure to either pass expenses onto consumers or restructure their entire production strategy. Companies that fail to adjust risk falling behind international competitors who do not face similar trade restrictions. Asian and European automakers are strategically positioned to take advantage of this shift, potentially increasing their market share in the United States, while domestic manufacturers struggle. Meanwhile, startups focusing on electric and alternative energy vehicles are exploring ways to capitalize on shifting industry dynamics, aiming to bypass traditional supply chain vulnerability. This moment represents a turning point for the United States auto industry. Those that can adapt and innovate will emerge stronger, while those resistant to change may face a grim future. One thing is certain, thousands of American jobs are already at risk. The real impact on American jobs. It is not just about automakers, this affects millions of workers. When discussing tariffs and economic policies, much of the focus is placed on corporations and their ability to absorb financial losses. However, the most significant impact will be felt by American workers, particularly those employed in factories, supply chains, and dealerships across the nation. Mass layoffs have already begun as automakers scramble to cut costs in response to higher material expenses. Many companies have frozen hiring, reduced shifts, and in some cases closed plants entirely. Small and mid-sized suppliers, which form the backbone of the manufacturing network, are experiencing unprecedented disruptions, with some forced into bankruptcy due to supply shortages and increased costs. The effects extend beyond the factory floor. Dealerships are seeing reduced inventory, making it harder to meet consumer demand, and repair shops are struggling with higher prices on parts sourced from overseas. Even industries indirectly tied to automotive production, such as transportation and logistics, are feeling the ripple effects, with reduced freight and shipping operations leading to job losses in those sectors as well. The consequences are not limited to the United States alone. With American manufacturing at risk, international suppliers and businesses that rely on steady exports to the United States market are also facing uncertainty. If American car companies are forced to downsize or shift operations overseas, it could set off a global chain reaction, affecting employment and economic stability in multiple countries. The trade policy shift. The current economic landscape is a direct result of shifting trade policies that prioritize domestic manufacturing but risk alienating international trade partners. The imposition of tariffs is often framed as a means to protect American jobs, yet history has repeatedly shown that trade wars rarely yield simple victories. The North American and global auto industries are deeply interconnected. While tariffs are meant to encourage domestic production, they also disrupt decades of trade agreements that have allowed automakers to source materials and assemble vehicles efficiently. Policies that limit free trade tend to drive up costs for both producers and consumers, making American-made vehicles less competitive on the global market. In the political arena, trade policies have become a key point of contention. Policymakers and industry leaders are debating whether these tariffs are a necessary step toward economic self-reliance or a dangerous gamble that could further isolate American manufacturers. With competing interests at play, there is no clear consensus on whether the United States will continue down this path or seek new agreements to stabilize the industry. What's next for Ford? Ford, as one of the most iconic American automakers, finds itself at a critical juncture. The company must navigate complex economic pressures while maintaining its market leadership. With rising production costs, potential shifts in government policies, and increased competition from both domestic and international rivals, Ford faces one of the most challenging periods in its history. One possible strategy involves a renewed investment in domestic manufacturing, including restructuring supply chains to reduce reliance on foreign-made parts. Ford is already exploring exploring options to strengthen its electric vehicle division, positioning itself for long-term success in a rapidly evolving market. However, this transition requires significant capital, and in an environment of economic uncertainty, securing the necessary investment may prove difficult. Another path Ford could take involves expanding strategic partnerships with global automakers and technology firms. By collaborating with established industry leaders, the company could mitigate financial risk while accelerating innovation. But for now, the ultimate question remains: will Ford emerge from this crisis stronger, or will it struggle to maintain its place in an increasingly competitive industry? What do you think? Let's know in the comments. Thanks for watching.